My name is Kathy Leach, and I'm the British ambassador to Kazakhstan. And today I want to talk to you about, I guess, two character traits in me, which I think have led me into this profession, into this role, which I have the great honour now to undertake. And I think they're two traits which have to be common to most people in my profession as a diplomat. And the first of those is curiosity. Because curiosity is all about wanting to discover something about new worlds. And I would say right from when I was a small child, and my father used to read world literature to me at night, I found a huge joy in language, in books that transported me to other worlds. And those other worlds then became foreign languages. And I remember vividly the first time I ever went overseas, the first time I went abroad. This is a long time ago, in 1980, and my parents, we always had camping holidays in Wales and Scotland. And in 1980, for the first time, we went camping in France. And I remember hearing my father speak French, pulling some words out of his memory from learning French at school and communicating with the lady in the campsite, or ordering a crepe in a creperie with the chocolate sauce and cream, and thinking how amazing and wonderful it was that these different sounds, these different words could mean something, and that you could learn them and communicate with other people. So that really, I think, for me, was the start of a passion about other places. And I grew up in a small village. I escaped in my imagination to these other worlds. And then at school, I discovered history. And I remember vividly my history teacher, Mr. Sherman, taking the first class on the Russian Revolution, the 1917 revolution. And it felt like my eyes had opened. Suddenly the news became understandable. This is what the Cold War was. I was a child of the Cold War. This is what communism was. This is what the news meant. And I retained that enormous interest in wanting to explore. And so after finishing school at 18, I took a gap year and went traveling across Europe, across the Middle East, went to America, working as a nanny, working in a factory, trying to live on about $10 a day, staying in very cheap youth hostels, exploring for the first time the world around me. And this led me eventually into the job that I now have as a diplomat. And my job involves changing my job every 3 to 4 years. So every 3 to 4 years I do something very different. I could do human rights, or I could do trade and development policy, or climate change, or security policy. I live in different countries. I've lived in Russia, in Japan, in Armenia, and now in Kazakhstan. And each time you start from scratch. And that's quite hard, actually, because starting from scratch as a grown-up, learning anew about a new country, learning a new language, you have a very uncomfortable period at the beginning where you feel like you know nothing. You feel incompetent. You feel like a child on the first day of school again. And that's quite uncomfortable, learning a new foreign language. And in my time, I've learnt Russian, German, French, Japanese, Armenian, and Kazakh. Learning a new language, you're, again, making yourself very vulnerable. You feel quite stupid for months and months as you try to remember and try to express yourself. But this seems to be what makes me motivated, this exploration of a new language, a new culture, a new country. And I think what I understood was that my kind of curiosity is a broad curiosity. I like to find out a little about a lot. For some people, their curiosity is very deep. And I think part of what you have to do as a young person when you're thinking about going out into the world is to understand what your curiosity is. Is it broad or is it deep? The world needs both, but you will find the right job for you and the right career for you when you match your kind of curiosity to what the job requires. The second trait is optimism. Now, we as diplomats, we need optimism because the world can sometimes seem like a difficult place. And a depressed, cynical diplomat is not a good diplomat. We have a constant belief, I think, that if we have another conversation, if we keep the conversation going, if we find out something else, that somehow we can make the world a better place. And we don't like to say that out loud very often because it sounds a bit romantic and idealistic, and we, I think, like to think of ourselves as hard-headed pragmatists, analytical, professional. But I think if you ask most people in my profession why they're doing that job rather than another one that probably pays them better, the answer is that they feel like they want to do something to make the world better for their country. They want to do something better for the world. And I don't want to over-romanticize this, but I think that's a really strong motivation. And it's important to hang on to that because it's very easy when you watch the news to lose that feeling of optimism. At the moment, we feel very overwhelmed by COVID-19, so many deaths. It feels like the news constantly shows conflicts and wars across Africa, the Middle East, and now in the heart of Europe. And it's really hard to continue to feel optimistic sometimes. And this is when sometimes stepping back a bit and just looking at data is a really important thing. And some of you who watch TED Talks may be aware of the Swedish professor Hans Rosling, who devoted his life to developing a set of brilliant charts which show more clearly than anything else the progress that we have made in the world over the last 100 years, and particularly the last 50, 70 years since the end of the Second World War. And there's another Swedish researcher, Johan Norberg, who I would recommend to you, who wrote a little yellow book called Progress, which again summarizes some of these amazing statistics in a small book. He was motivated to do it when a survey in his native Sweden of educated, ordinary people, asking them, do you think there are more people who are poor now and who are suffering food insecurity now than 30 years ago? And over 70% said yes. And he realized that people were watching the news and getting a picture of the world that wasn't actually true. And the facts of the matter are that whereas in 1947, half the world was food insecure, half the world was hungry, now it's 13% at a time where the world population has gone up from 2.5 billion to over 8 billion. In terms of education, mortality, a child born today is very likely to meet their own grandchildren, whereas 50 years ago, a child was much more likely to die before their 5th birthday. And what makes me excited about this and optimistic as a public servant, as a civil servant, is that often this is public policy which has made a difference. And I realize for a lot of young people, talking about public policy may not sound very exciting, so forgive me for being excited about it. But while technology, wealth creation are obviously absolutely necessary to improve the lives of everybody, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. What has made the difference has been public policy. And this is good government. This is governments deciding to fund free education. It's about governments putting investment in sanitation, in transport, and in connecting their country to the wider world. And you see this really clearly in the amazing development of countries like China and India over the last few years. How India has increased its GDP since 1950 by more than 5 times, how China has done it by more than 20 times, how in 1981, 9 in 10 people in China were extremely poor, and now it's 1 in 10. So these extraordinary developments in public policy to share wealth, technology across the population and not just in a narrow elite have made a huge difference to people's lives. And as a public servant, as a civil servant, this optimism that governments can make a difference is really important. So the final thing I'll say is it's always important to be realistic as well as optimistic, and on issues that we shouldn't blind ourselves to some of the challenges we have. One of the big challenges at the moment, which is a long-term challenge and therefore a really difficult one for us to solve, is climate change. And this year my country is holding the presidency of COP26, which is the United Nations conference that happens every year, where countries try to come together to agree public policy on how we're going to adapt to this challenge. And you can be very worried and negative about the ability of governments to take decisions. It feels like we're all too slow. But actually, the conference we held last year showed that things can change. We now have 90% of the world covered by a pledge to reach net zero carbon emissions, whereas 2 years ago it was 30%. And we know that there is the technology, there are the pathways to keep global warming to under 1.5% if we make the tough decisions. And if all of you, young people, make your personal decisions every day about how you use resources and energy. So this is why I'm optimistic. And being in Kazakhstan, this country makes me feel optimistic. And I say that as someone that 30 years ago came to this part of the world and saw a country, a political system fall apart in front of my eyes. So I have some understanding, a personal understanding of what has happened in Kazakhstan over the last 30 years, and this extraordinary achievement in reaching now upper middle income status over that period. It's an extraordinary achievement which we should really recognise and feel proud about, and look forward to what the next 30 years will deliver as well. So those are my two traits: curiosity, optimism, and I really hope and wish that as you set out into the world, onto your career path, that you take those two traits and find a way to bring them into anything you do, and then you will find fulfillment and success, I'm sure. Thank you. Mm-hmm.